your questions. We welcome your questions and comments during the presentation today. And please put them in the Q&A box when you have them, and put them in when they come to you, because this will be the kind of presentation where once we get a question or comment, we'll stop and have our presenters address those. It creates a dialogue, and we think it'll be a dynamic conversation that way. So please don't hold back and enter those in at the end of the presentation. Feel free to just enter them in as soon as they come to you. We also are welcome to able to answer questions or address comments at the end of the presentation. And if we don't get to it, or if you have any other general questions or comments, please email us at info@anjec.org. Next slide. For those of you who may not know about ANJEC, we decided to include a slide here with our mission statement. ANJEC has been around for over 50 years. We're a statewide environmental nonprofit in New Jersey, and we help environmental commissions and support them with education, training, resources, etc., as well as advocate for strong public policy at the state level in Trenton. Next slide, please. We want to let you know about upcoming programs and events for next month at ANJEC. Saturday, May 11th in the morning, we're hosting an in-person networking event for South and Central Jersey region. On Tuesday, May 14th at noon, we're hosting a virtual webinar in partnership with Clean Communities, and the title is Clearing the Path, Tackling Litter at the Source. And then on Thursday, May 16th at 7 o'clock, we're holding a webinar on New Jersey's energy future, offshore wind projects and research updates. That will be virtual as well. And lastly, we wanted to let you all know about a grant opportunity being offered by the New Jersey DEP. It's a community-based art grant. And the program deadline is this coming Monday, April 29th. Should you be interested, I included the link to it in the slide, and I'll also have Deanie put that in the chat when she has a chance, so you can pick that up that way. Next slide. ANJEC's work is made possible by supporters like you via memberships, individual donations, foundation support, and corporate sponsors. If you're not a member already and you're interested in that, please take out your smartphone. You can scan this QR code and go to the membership page of our website. We'll also put that link in the chat, and you can look at that later. And we thank you for all your support. Next slide. Lastly, keep in touch with us via our website, via email. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. We have our YouTube channel as well. And if you're a member listening tonight, we have a member interest form where we like to hear from our members to see what your needs are, and also to see what you're hoping to achieve for this year, or what you have achieved already. So again, you can use your smartphone here to scan the QR code, or we'll put the link to that form in the chat, and you can open it up on your own time. Next slide. So here we are. I'm very happy to introduce Angelina and Tim of New York City's Poster House this evening. This is our event to celebrate Earth Day, and we're very pleased that you're here. They are going to be discussing an exhibit at Poster House in Manhattan, and the title is "We Tried to Warn You: Environmental Crisis Posters from 1970 to 2020." This was on display up until February at Poster House, and due to popularity, it is being redisplayed in the museum starting today. So today it opened, and it's going to run through November. So I'll turn it over now to Angelina and Tim, and thank you very much. We're very happy that you are providing this for us this evening.
Oh, our absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, here, I'm operating the slides on our end tonight, so
Can
you see it? Do you see our logo? Excellent. So as you mentioned, Tim's show was the most popular show the museum's ever had as far as press coverage and audience attendance. So we just recently made the decision to extend it in a slightly smaller gallery, reconfigured, so that we could have people exposed to it for an additional 6 months. So it will become the longest running show we've ever had, which I think is really impressive, especially because it links to issues of climate change. So it shows the popularity of this topic. The other thing I want to say before we begin, since we're kind of framing this less as a exhibition tour and more of a talk between two curators about how a show like this is put together, I want to talk about what Poster House is first and foremost. And so Poster House is a lovely logo designed by Paula Scher, but I'll also have these two images, which have nothing to do with the environmental show, up for a second. So we're the first and only museum in the United States dedicated to the art and history of posters. And what I found when I say this to people is that everyone kind of has their own idea of what a poster is, and not all of them are correct. So I wanted to define what a poster is before we begin so that you understand the framework of what we're dealing with. So we define a poster as a public-facing notice meant to persuade that marries word and image that is a printed multiple. So those are four very important things to keep in mind when you look at what we're going to show you tonight. So public-facing notice, so that means it has to be street-facing. It can't be like Live, Laugh, Love that you take home and put in your house. That is not what we cover. We do public, street-facing, consumable by everyone. Meant to persuade, so it has to ask you to vote, to buy something, to attend an event. Again, Live, Laugh, Love doesn't really ask you to do anything. So not that, but if it's asking you, in this case, the two pieces on display are talking about events or a cabaret, that we would show that. And then that marries word and image. So in the 1870s, the ability to print text and images as a single unit was perfected in advertising art. Prior to that, text and image had to be printed separately. So we kind of start with the 1870s and go to the present day. And a printed multiple, we don't do signage. So if it's a protest sign that you make at home and that you carry in a march, that's wonderful, but that is signage, not a poster. So now that you know how we frame what a poster is, what we display and what we collect, I figured we can move into Tim's show. And also, if you have any questions about anything I said, put them in the chat and somebody will shout them at one of us. So I figured, Tim, we'd begin with the origins of your exhibition and how you actually pitched this show to the museum. We didn't ask you to do this. So where did the idea even come from?
So I was actually sitting at home in Vermont in the time of COVID, I guess. And my youngest child, my son, was studying environmental science and public policy. And I thought, oh, well, I've always been interested in environmental issues, but I thought I should read more. And one of the books I read, which I conveniently have to hand, was this, Falter by Bill McKibben. And there was this quote, which I think you can all see: science and economics have no real way to value the fact that people have lived for millennia in a certain rhythm, have eaten the food, blah, blah, blah. And basically what it says is that science is great at demonstrating certain things, but it doesn't make you feel in the same way. And I'd been thinking for a long time that this was a deficiency. If you just hit people with statistics, they zone out. And then I thought, oh, art. Bill's saying that only art can deal with these things, and posters they're graphic art. And I knew there were environmental posters, hence why I pitched it, because I thought it was a show I thought people would want to see it. And also, I very much wanted to get the message out. And it was one of those things, interestingly, in the run-up to the show, we had a complaint like 2 days before the show opened, and the complaint was from an environmentalist. And it was one of those things where environmentalism, any activism, is a spectrum, and people should want to be involved, but they should not feel bad to start with. So I just very much wanted to get this out as something that would get people involved via the use of words and images.
So I'm going to go through some of your images here, and this is the first poster in the show. Can you talk? I'm gonna cycle through like a few of my greatest hits from the beginning of the exhibition, if you want to touch on why you included them.
So, I mean, you can't really talk about this poster without the quote next to it. And as you walk into the gallery, you see the Richard Nixon quote, which you can all read. And I very much wanted that quote there for the very simple reason that everything gets politicized in the US, and environmentalism is no different to that. And these very moving words were spoken by Richard Nixon. And basically, if Tricky Dicky could get it, anybody could. This should not be politicized. To the poster. Robert Rauschenberg designed this poster. It's the first official Earth Day poster. Robert Rauschenberg was America's most famous living artist at that point in time. And he worked in a collage style. So you can see a screen print of the American eagle, the American emblem in the middle, and surrounding it, these muted pictures of the devastation that the American eagle was wreaking at home and abroad, whether it be open cast mining, animals in distress, smokestacks, polluted waterways, whatever. So it's a very clear messaging. And Earth Day I hadn't fully appreciated the scale of the first Earth Day, precipitated to an extent by the poster communication. There were 200 million people living in America on the first Earth Day. 20 million people got involved. 1 million people marched in Manhattan alone, 10% of the population. It's generally accepted that grassroots activism affects politics, affects policy when it hits 3.5% of the population. So they trebled that. Hence why probably Richard Nixon got it. The other really fascinating thing for me about this was that, first Earth Day was April 1970. 5 months before that became an event, it was only supposed to be on university campuses. So it accelerated so fast that it was it went to being a nationwide event to a global event very, very quickly, which always fills me with optimism because things can change quickly.
And this is
before we jump on to the next one. So let me just get some clarification. We got a question here. Well, so these posters, this first Earth Day poster, it was going through the universities, or how was it? How did it start getting traction? How was it released?
It was Robert Rauschenberg gave his time, basically produced it in advance of the first Earth Day. It was produced in a limited edition signed to raise money, but then tens of thousands were actually produced to be distributed. So people saw them and started hanging them on their walls around campuses, which then fed out into the broader community.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And you can also tell the difference between the print, the collectible print version and the poster version by the presence in the lower right-hand corner of the date. April 22nd is only there on the actual physical poster version. The date is removed and replaced by Rauschenberg's signature in the fine art print version. So these would have been on the street in Washington and other major cities as well. All right, moving on to the next poster that I really like in this show because of the comparisons. So tell me what's going on here.
Okay, so on the left, you have Milton Glazer's 1970 poster for the Environmental Action Coalition, Give Earth a Chance. And it's planet Earth inside a room. It also looks like Goodnight Moon before anybody says that. What is spooky about it? One of our education associates said, when we were doing the first tour, which is for internal people only, it looks like Earth is in a museum, which is a genuinely scary prospect. But I was always interested in what inspired it. And on the right-hand side, you can see the Earthrise photograph, what's been called the most influential environmental photograph ever taken. This is Apollo 8, went up in 1968, flew around the moon and took this shot of Earth from the vantage point of the moon. First time it had ever been done. And you could see the beauty of Earth, but also the vulnerability of it, I guess. And at this point in time, 1970, we're very much about save the planet. It's not about the existential threats we're facing now. It's save the planet, save air, save water. We haven't made the causal link that actually it's about humanity. But if you look at it, you can see that Milton Glaser, I think, 1970, is very much riffing on this photograph. He's appropriated it. That's what poster design, that's what artists do. They take other images and they adapt them. So this one, Tom Eckersley. It's obviously a World Wildlife poster. Tom Eckersley is a British artist. This one is really interesting. It's from the mid-1980s, and you can see our simian friend is pointing to the fact that man needs rainforest too. This is actually the first poster that we found that deals with the fact that we should protect rainforests, we should protect animals, but actually it's about dealing with humanity. As we're addressing a group in New Jersey, I should point out that we're still every year destroying 4 times the land mass of New Jersey in the Amazon alone in rainforests, which is a really stupid thing to do to carbon sinks. We need them. The Cute, we're going to get on in a minute to how we built the collection. This is an absolute anomaly in the show. Most of 99.9% of the posters in the show we bought for this show. This one actually belongs to my son. And I gave it to him as a Christmas present a few years ago because he's an environmentalist. And but I wanted it in the show. He, of course, being a 23-year-old young man who lives in New York, uses it as a first date prop. So one of his lines is, I lend my art to New York museums. Apparently it's massively successful.
I would think the accent would be massively successful as well. But
Hey, you've got to use every tool you've got.
Because you just came on, Deanie, does that mean that there's a question?
Oh, sorry. No, I just found that very entertaining.
Oh,
I needed to
okay.
add on. That's really funny.
Well, but
That's
Tim, you
clever.
bring up a good point that we're always asked how a show is built. And the museum typically builds shows either from loans from within the permanent collection or when we seek out to purchase things for an exhibition. And so I wanted to look at the next few pieces in terms of how we got them. And how you chose to incorporate them into the show. So I'm going to start with this poster by Amos Kennedy, which was a poster we already had in the museum's permanent collection. It was part of a show that I curated a few years prior, and the museum has this long-standing relationship with Amos Kennedy. He's a black letterpress printer based in Detroit. And one of our goals is obviously always to have a diversity of voices in any exhibition. And knowing that Amos touched upon these issues made him very attractive when I suggested that you might want to consider including something by him. But what part of this poster was like, how did this poster contribute to the narrative of the show?
So, first of all, if you haven't seen Amos's work, you should seek it out. It's always impactful. He covers many issues, and he's just good fun. He's a righteous human being. This one, though, was produced for a climate justice march, and climate justice is something we'll touch on again and again, I suspect. But it very basically comes down to the idea that it is communities, whether in the US or globally, that are least responsible for the issues that are most affected, which is, broadly speaking, unfair. And yeah, Amos produced this for March in New York, actually. My story with this was at the opening party. Poster House opening parties are great fun, by the way. 2 young people walked up to me. I could see them looking at me for about 15 minutes before they walked up. And they were climate PhDs from Columbia, and they were both from Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is a country of 150 million people. 80% of the country is below sea level. So they had chosen to become environmentalists because they know that in 50, 60 years, their country, which is not responsible for climate change in any way, is going to flood. And so they were trying to deal with those issues, which was actually quite humbling.
Now, this piece, whenever we do an exhibition that we're building from scratch, as the chief curator of the museum, I do like a call out to all of the dealers. I worked at a poster auction house for about a decade before I came onto the museum. So I know everyone in posters. There are like 36 of us and that's it. So we all know each other. So I send out like the APB very frantically of what we need, and we see what comes back, and we make interesting discoveries from there. And this was not a poster that either Tim nor I were familiar with. And it had a really, actually, you'll probably want to talk about the things we didn't even know about it until the show went up, because we weren't attuned to the symbolism the way somebody who the original intended audience would be.
So this is by an artist called Shikako Ogawa, Japanese. This is actually a Japanese poster. I know it's in English. None of us have any idea why it is in English, not Japanese. And to be honest, the reason I wanted the poster in the show, if you you can see me, and you can see that he and I are both very good-looking, mature gentlemen with the requisite hairline. So I felt empathy with this dude. It deals with a very serious issue, acid rain. And acid rain is not something we really face much in the US anymore, but it used to be a major issue in the US. It's still a major issue in many parts of the world. For instance, when the monsoons start falling in India, the relative pH of the rain that falls is that of grapefruit juice, which is genuinely terrifying. So I wanted it because I wanted to lighten the mood at various points in the show. And I just thought he looked quite funny protecting the lone strand of hair on his head, strand of hair on his head. Got it right eventually. The funny thing was that when we were doing the initial tour for staff, Mahoshi, who's one of the design team, who is Japanese, looked at this and said, "Oh, this is from Sashiwa-san." And Angelina and I looked at each other and said, "Of course. Yes, we didn't know that at all. Please explain." So the longest running cartoon series in the world is this Japanese series that started in 1946. It's still running. And this gentleman seen here is the grandfather figure of a multi-generational family. And every Japanese person knows how proud he is of the one strand of hair on his head, on the top of his head, and how much he will do to protect it from acid rain or anything else. So there was humor and a narrative that we just didn't know.
Now, this piece, I know people are going to think this is a spoof poster. It is not. This poster was part of the Living Archive, so we already had it in the museum's collection. The Living Archive is basically, I contact ad agencies all around the world for everyone, where from like Nairobi to Tokyo to Buenos Aires, and I contact them, and based on posters that I see in an advertising annual of like best posters in the world, and then we collect them. So we also are a repository for the best in contemporary advertising. And this poster is advertising Lexus, which it makes no sense to an American sense of humor, but somehow this works really well is it from, it's in Sao Paulo?
Argentinian poster, yeah. We wanted posters from around the world. This is yeah.
Yes.
It's
so yeah, you talk about what.
It's produced by the Buenos Aires branch of one of the world's largest multinational advertising agencies, Ogilvy and Mather. And I just loathe these people. And it was one of those things that, imagine Angelina and I and the archive staff, whatever else, literally handling a bunch of posters. And I just looked at this and I thought, what the expletive deleted, what is this? So one of the things that industry will try and pitch to us is there is such a thing as righteous consumption. and Lexus hybrids are more economical than V8 pickup trucks, for instance. Absolutely. However, they're on a Riva speedboat that's got a V8 engine. It costs $600,000 to start with. They're trying to protect whales, but they just don't look very empathetic. Let's put it that way. So in every way, I looked at this and thought, this is just awful. What is this really going to make people buy Lexuses? And we wanted to have it in to show the extremes of advertising. The funny thing was that in an event, in-person event at the museum where wine was being consumed, there was a couple and they were sort of agitatedly talking to each other, and I just sort of looked at them, and at the end the wife, female partner, turned to the husband and said, "I want to sell the expletive Lexus tomorrow." So it had the opposite effect of whatever they intended to do it. The funny thing about this, of course, is that the Ogilvy and Mather, who produced it, their most famous claim to fame in environmental terms is that in 2006, BP hired them to come up with a deflection strategy from people looking at BP, talking about their environmental impact. And what they came up with was the personal carbon footprint. So when you look at your personal carbon footprint and feel bad about it, please be aware that it's been promoted by Ogilvy and Mather on behalf of BP, so you feel bad about yourself, not bad about BP.
Wow, that is some really interesting background. Thanks for sharing that, especially about the personal carbon footprint.
Yeah,
I know you had said that this poster was released in Argentina. Do you know how well it was received there?
So any of the posters that I get for the Living Archive, usually I only am made aware of them because they're in this trade publication that is like the best of, which usually means like one of the metrics of measuring that is how well received they are. I would say most of the contemporary posters that get into this publication that come out of Latin America do not really match up with American sensibility when it comes to humor. They are wild. I have seen dog food advertised with basically like BDSM. They take like one idea sometimes and they make it, they extremize it. So it's an interesting advertising sensibility is happening down there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we had a question here. What is the red reflection near the other boat?
Oh, that's the blood from the whale. You see the whale tail sticking up? The whale has been harpooned.
Got it. Okay.
Cool. So the next poster we're going to look at is, we put this in the slideshow because it's my favorite poster in the collection, and I'm an advertising historian, so my sweet spot is the 1870s to the 1960s. Which obviously predates much of Tim's show. But I knew that I wanted something that like anchored the show in the poster canon. So something that people who are poster historians or really poster collectors would recognize and know as a poster with a capital P. And this poster by Hans Erni is definitely the most famous piece in the show. And one that I thought would be a good grounding method to put the rest of the posters in the context of the poster pantheon. But Tim, did you want to talk about this at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously striking. It's a memento mori. It's if you don't look after the water, look what becomes of you. It's a Swiss poster. Switzerland is the largest per capita producer, I guess, of quality posters. It's a government. They've wanted to do this for many years. The good news is they also sponsor Poster House opening parties and produce very good wine for us. That's nice. You can tell it's a Swiss poster because it's got the 4 Swiss languages. So it's a national campaign, and English for those of us who obviously don't speak the 4 Swiss languages. The other reason, as you mentioned, it's Ernie's posters are part of the canon of posters. I happen to love the man because his first poster was became a nationwide campaign when he was 18 years old in Switzerland. And his last poster was produced for the UN when he was 103. So he was an older person who kept going and was still relevant. And for obvious reasons, when you see me, you know, I have admiration for Mr. Ernie.
Now, before we get into talking about the history of this poster, which is incredibly interesting and controversial, what I'm bringing on the next few posters we're going to look at is to talk about preservation and conservation of posters, because it's a very different beast from the fine print world or the painting world, because we just preserve them and treat them in a much more different way. They present different challenges. But before I talk about what this poster actually is and how we acquire it and how we have to preserve it, I think it might be best for you to like anchor it and what exactly are we looking at and why is it important and a pivotal moment in your show?
Yeah, so this is a 1971 poster. It's a still from a TV advert. And as my accent probably gives away, I was not born in the United States of America. So I had no idea about this poster or the TV advert it's taken from. In 1971, Keep America Beautiful launched a TV advertising series based around this Native American. And for those of you who have not seen it, the film, it's on YouTube, you can see it, it's about a minute long. The Native American is seen paddling his canoe down a stream which opens out onto a river. As it opens out onto a river, you can see smokestacks behind him. You can see dying fish, cans, various other bits of trash in the river. Then some guy drives on a road by the river, throws a gigantic bag of trash out of his car and speeds away. And the camera pans in on the Native American, and the giant tear rolls down his cheek as a growly, deep voice says, "People start pollution, people can stop it." And it was a very successful advertising campaign. If you were around in the US at that time, you will remember it. And to put it into perspective, this was a period of non-digital, obviously, the early 1970s. The advert was so successful that it wore through the film. The TV stations had to ask Keep America Beautiful for more film. It worked. I have no doubt whatsoever that Americans threw less trash into the water, onto the streets, than they would have done otherwise. And if that was it, it would be great. But it's not. Keep America Beautiful, although a not-for-profit dedicated to keeping America beautiful, was and is owned by a variety of corporations. Georgia Pacific, paper company, packaging companies, Philip Morris, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola. There's between 15 and 20 of them at any one time. And a major part of what they wanted to do was to shift responsibility from their products onto the consumer to keep America beautiful. And while they were doing this campaign, they were also lobbying Congress at the company level for the right to pump undiluted effluent into rivers and to generally behave disgracefully. In modern day parlance, whatever, this poster is also pretty reprehensible because the Native American as portrayed, Iron Eyes Cody, is not actually a Native American. He's a Sicilian American. Esperanza de Corti is his real name. So he was an actor who got shot many times by John Wayne in movies at the time. So it fails on every metric. Keep America Beautiful actually handed over the rights to the advert and the images last year, 2023, and the National Congress of the American Indian immediately said no more. It's always been inappropriate. So it's this weird story of it was effective, but there's a side story which is pretty disgusting. It's the first greenwashing attempt. So 1970, the first Earth Day, 1971, the first concerted effort by industry to make it your issue, not their issue.
Yeah, I find that amazing that fast turnaround, although not surprising. But as far as the poster itself is concerned, this is the type of ad that would be in like an in-car subway ad. So if you're on the subway in New York, there are the ads above the seats, and there are the ads at the end of each row of seats. They're in a little square frame. And this is one of those. Usually you have to go through dealers to get posters, but this one we got on eBay because I knew I wanted to incorporate this commercial in some way. And some strange person decided to save this from the 70s when it was in the New York City subway system. But as a result of that, it's on thicker stock. It's not on paper, and you can kind of see fraying and chipping away at the edges. So preserving it is actually rather challenging. We have to lie it flat in like acid-free paper and keep it in the flat file to preserve it. But yeah, so that's how one has to handle this type of poster. The next piece, this piece we got from a dealer in Delaware who had it, and the issue with it, as you can possibly see in the lower left-hand corner, as well as like parts of the upper right area, you'll see that there's a lot of water damage. In the middle, right by his kneecap, there's like a brown blob. We sent this off to a poster conservator to bleach, essentially, where it tries to lift out the stains through a bleaching bath, and not all of them could be easily removed. It's definitely better than what it looked like originally, and then it is laid on acid-free linen with a piece of acid-free paper between it, so you can roll it. It makes it more durable. But yes, the posters come to us in all different states of condition, and this was possibly one of the worst ones. But again, you wanted this for your narrative for rather explicit reasons, right?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing was he's wearing a gas mask. Obviously, it's a rendition of Rodin's The Thinker, and gas mask imagery. We'll see in one of the thing is, has been popular from the early 1970s on, dealing with air quality. What I find fascinating about it is, if you put a gas mask on a piece of art in the fine canon where he's not thinking deep thoughts, he just suddenly looks thoroughly pissed off with the situation. So it's interesting how one thing can change the message going. And obviously you can see Rodin's The Thinker against a post-industrial apocalyptic backdrop. It's by Ray Osrin, who was the cartoonist for the Cleveland Plain Dealer for about 30 years. And the group that made this poster was Environmental Action, who actually drafted a lot of what became the Clean Air Act in 1970-71. But the other thing is they were the first organization to produce the term environmental justice in 1970. So even though we think environmental justice is a relatively new concept, it's actually been around from the beginning as well.
And this poster is not really a traditional poster. It's a poster in that you fold it out and you're meant to hang it up, but it's actually a mailer that was designed by the EPA and sent out to people if they bought a new car, correct, Tim?
Yeah, if you could see the other side of it, you would actually see somebody's address. If you bought a new car in 1973, the EPA sent this poster through your letterbox. So making the point to you, the EPA knew where you lived. And the EPA was created in end of 1970, and one of their first acts was the Clean Air Act. And with that, they went to the automotive industry and said, you've got to clean your exhaust emissions. And the automotive industry said, well, how are we going to do that? Well, first they said no, and then they said, how are we going to do that? And the government said, we really don't care how you do it. You have scientists, you have engineers. We are telling you, you have 5 years to do it. That's the end of the story. It was a landmark piece of legislation. To put it into perspective, car exhausts, it absolutely is that driving an electronic vehicle is better for the environment than driving a petroleum vehicle. But nonetheless, petroleum vehicles are 99% cleaner at the exhaust than they were in the early 1970s. And the reason is very simply the government told the car manufacturers, do it. The car manufacturers did it. And the concept of the catalytic converter came into being. A New Jersey invention, Engelhard of New Jersey. And so that's great. And the US was the first country to make them mandatory in 1975. This is from 1973 when they started being introduced. And the interesting thing about this to me, besides fact, remember, the EPA knows where you live. They send this through your door, and they're telling you don't tamper with the catalytic converter, because there were stories that your car was less powerful if you strapped a catalytic converter to your big V8 engine. Look at the fine in the middle, $10,000. The median US salary in 1973 was $10,300. So they know where you live. They send a bloody great poster through your letterbox, and it says, we'll fine you a year's salary if you take the catalytic converter off. So there's the do the right thing, don't pollute the air, but also be under no illusions what will happen to you if you do it. So I just think it's, I like the imagery, but I like the iron fist and the velvet glove.
And finally, the final poster in the preservation section is this one, which was added to the show like 3 days before we opened it. This was not part of the original plan. This was not part of the original design. But as Tim likes to tell it, which I will steal his thunder today. I was walking home from dinner one night, and I walked past like one of those construction walls, and I saw this on the wall, and I was like, oh my God, it's riffing on WPA era design. So 1930s poster design. And it would be so perfect for Tim's show. So I cut it off the wall, took it back home, brought it to the museum the next day, immediately sent it to our restorers to try to stabilize it, because it's printed on shitty paper. It's luckily, if it was wheat pasted to the wall, there would be no way I could get it off. It was just had some put packing tape all around the edges, but the packing tape had stuck to itself. It was messed up. But through restoration, we were able to preserve it and include it in the show in time for opening, which I thought was really great.
Yep, and first thing is bear in mind that Angelina carries a knife, which is very good to know. But yeah, it's, as Angelina said, it's a WPA style poster. It's tied to the concept that the big five American banks are the biggest five lenders to the fossil fuel industry, and if they lent less, the fossil fuel industry would have a less big pipeline of production issues.
Now, I just want to check on time before we go to the next section, because I know we have about 2 sections left, but I just want to know how much time we have left.
15 minutes.
50 minutes. Okay, great. Oh, actually, this is the last piece in the preservations part of my question. You can talk about how we got it, but generally speaking, when we framed this, because it's a silk screen, backing it is very challenging. If you back a silk screen, the inks tend to lift. So as we were framing it, we noticed that it started waving in the frame, which is a little bit like, oh no. So that we had to take it out of the frame, build a slightly bigger frame to account for the expansion of the piece as it acclimates to the museum's humidity, and then rehang it in like the course of 3 days when we were closed. But Tim, I know this is also your favorite piece in the show.
It is. If you remember the Bill McGibbon quote that started the whole thing, it deals with fear and anger, but also hope. And the weird story of this, it was not my favorite poster in the show at all as we went through the process of looking for things. It's part of a series of 6 posters that were produced by Olivetti in 1971 to raise money for the United Nations Environmental Program. So it was good because it was a corporate doing righteous things. More importantly, I was interested in it very cynically because they hired 6 artists to produce the posters, one of whom was Roy Lichtenstein, one of whom was Georgia O'Keeffe, and I thought, wow, excellent, famous name artists. At some point, it'll be a great opportunity for people. They'll take pictures of this, blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, Roy and Georgia both had an off day when they produced their posters. They were just, I thought they were fairly lackluster, to be polite, and I showed them to Angelina and she said, yeah, these are crap. But I really wanted something from the series, and this one by Ernest Trover really sort of caught my eye. Ernest Trover is not a big name now. He was a very big name in 1971. He was a sculptor. And he was most famous for a sculpture called The Falling Man. In his words, humanity falling backwards into an uncertain future. And what I really like about it, I guess, is that the hope, the agency, because if you are leaning backwards into an uncertain future over, the obvious thing to do is to lean forward and walk away from the precipice. So it gives the idea of optionality, of choice. Also, if you look at it, the sky is red. We had red sky last summer over the East Coast because of the forest fires in Quebec. The tide is clearly rising. It's just below the butt cheeks of said statue, so that's getting quite scary. And the reflection, the shadow is of the sculpture looks like an oil slick. So it's from 1971, but it appears very contemporary. But what I really like, the messaging that we can do something about this. We just have to decide to do so.
Now, another thing about this show that people really responded well to is the fact that it is a global show. It's not just the US perspective on environmentalism and climate change. So how did you account for a diversity of voices within the exhibition?
I mean, it was the first thing we said to people is, look, we want as many posters from around the world as possible. This one, the designer of the show, Ola, is actually Polish. And to be clear, Poster House is not a white wall museum. Every show we repaint the galleries. Design really matters in enhancing the message. And Ola does a phenomenal job with the rest of the team. This is a Polish poster. Ola brought it up to me. Poland has a long history of posters going back to the 1960s, where the government, a totalitarian communist government, realized that artists were getting a bit antsy. And what they said to them is, we'll pay you to produce posters. They can be about theater, they can be about cinema, they can be about anything, just stay away from politics. And artists are quite cute, really. They all said, yes, thank you, give us the money. And then they produced a series of surrealist images, which could have multiple meanings. So they were as prescribed by the government, but they also had different views. This one is actually by a Lithuanian living in Poland in 1989, Stasys Eidrivičius. And, it's a surreal image. And you can see the bewildered looking fellow with the bewildered looking birds fleeing away from something. You can see the gray/black sky, and you can see the one sad little tree in the bottom left. And this is from 1989. So when Poland was literally the year communism ended in Poland and we moved into a post-communist era, I spent the 1990s, pretty much all of it, living in Central and Eastern Europe and Russia. And one of the points I wanted to make, because many people talk about our environmental crisis as a capitalist construct. I went to, in the 90s, some of the most polluted places in the world on Earth in that region, including what people view as the most polluted area on Earth in Siberia and Norilsk. But also in the following decade, I went to China a great deal and saw some pretty horrific things there too. This is a Polish poster. Poland still produces 75% of its energy by burning coal. To put it in perspective, the US is 15% by burning coal, and the UK is 0% by burning coal. Coal is the worst fuel you can use, and the worst type of coal is lignite, brown coal, which is what Poland mines, and it mines it by open cast mining. It just scrapes it up out of the ground, so coal dust goes flying into the air. So this, is a poster from 1989. Poland still has a major issue, and as Ola says, the taste of winter in Poland is the taste of coal dust in the air. So it's very evocative of an issue. This also from 79 is a Chinese poster. Weirdly, we had a Chinese curator come round and look at the show, and they said to me, well, we had our silent spring moment, our realization that we have to do something in China in 2012. 2012, 2013 was what they said. This is actually from 1979. So this is when the Deng Xiaoping revolution, when modern China literally started. So it's as it started, and you can see the rather fetching scientist there measuring water quality with the happy birds, and a city behind her which absolutely would not have existed in China at that point in time. So it's looking forward and saying that China can grow, but also be an environmental leader. We all know how much coal China burns and all the rest of the issues that it has. It's also, however, by far the largest producer of solar energy and wind energy in the world. So it is dealing with its issues. Next. Eric Carle, Very Hungry Caterpillar, happy image. I really wanted African posters if we could get them. There's all sorts of reasons why we couldn't. A, dealers don't have them. B, there are very strong African environmental campaigns, but it's dangerous. So when they produce posters, they are, as Angelina said, they would be handmade, and then they would trash them very quickly because they don't necessarily want their governments to come for them. So this is a United Nations Environment Program, but that program is based in Nairobi in Kenya. You can see the word mazingira, which is environment in Swahili. It's from 1982. In the 1970s, a very brave woman in Kenya started the concept that we should be planting trees, not destroying them. She actually did become an MP, but she did spend a bit of time in prison, and her husband did divorce her for the cheekiness in launching this campaign. But it has been massively successful. Last year, Kenya launched a national holiday. One day a year, everybody gets a day off school, off work, to go plant trees. So it's a grassroots activism that has grown from Kenya through Africa, through the rest of the world. And it's Eric Carle, and it's pretty.
Indeed. Now, just in the sake of time, I'm going to skip over this one unless
Skip him, yeah.
Okay, because I want to talk about my final point was that climate change and all, and most environmental issues are obviously always weighed down by this feeling of doom and gloom, like nothing, can we do anything to make this better? And how did you construct your narrative so that people wouldn't leave the show feeling completely defeated?
So, I mean, the first thing is that there is hope, and we have absolutely got the tools now to do something about it. And I always say that when I'm doing a physical tour. But for the sake of brevity, the last few posters use bleak humor. This is a Seymour Cross poster. The British in World War II made the concept of humor as propaganda a plank of how they went through things. To quote the best producer of such posters, the difference between realistic and humorous propaganda. Realistic propaganda tries to stop you putting your hand in a circular saw by showing you just what happens when you do. The function of humorous propaganda, on the other hand, is to correct the state of mind that prompts you to put your hand there at all. I look at this poster and I smile every time I see it still, and I've seen it many times. You know, it's an official Earth Day poster from '95. I get up in the morning and I shave, and I do look bleary-eyed and grumpy, but the concept of trying to shave through a gas mask is just apparently funny. Obviously, you can't do it, but it does bring the point at the same time that air quality in many parts of the world is so deplorable that it's basically the same as we had for those 5 days in the summer when we all complained about. And yeah, these Winston Tseng is a hero. On the left, he has poster campaigns that go up across Manhattan. In Texas right now, he has a big campaign against book bans. In DC, he has a poster campaign. He appropriates other people's imagery. It has, the one in DC is an X-Lax fake advert showing a former president and talking about he's full of something. Anyway, On the left, we have ExxonMobil. It's not an Exxon advert, obviously. You've got Cuddly Rex Tillerson saying to the young lady, we're all in this together. Cuddly Rex was CEO of ExxonMobil for 25 years before he became Secretary of State. And, you know, ExxonMobil is obviously the world's largest oil and gas producer. And that's fine. The thing is, since in 1967, they started producing climate change data. That was when they started being aware that their activities would change the climate. And they could have told us about it, but actually they then spent the next 30 years dissimulating, trying to change the subject, denying, and basically outright lying. So we were not in this together. The Sesame Street one, count, 1, 2, is pointing to the 2 degrees Celsius climate change above pre-industrial times. You know, the Paris Climate Accords of 2015 ask us to try and keep climate change down to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels with a stretch target of 2 degrees. We're basically somewhere between 1.35, 1.4 degrees Celsius now, with a target apparently of 2.9 degrees by 2100 unless we get our act together. The difference is, you know, 1.5 degrees Celsius is 1 meter of ocean rise, 3 feet, and 2 degrees Celsius is 30 feet of climate change, which if you live on the Jersey Shore, will take you from having a, as Angelina's mom does, will take you from having a beachside view to being in Atlantis, basically. So that half a degree Celsius really matters. But they're funny and they make you think.
They are. And for everyone who doesn't know, if you're in New York, Winston often has these faux campaigns around Manhattan. I first became acquainted with him because I saw a mock MTA campaign that got him a cease and desist. And I figured out how to contact him and and the museum started collecting his posters as he produced them. And when we were putting this show together, I specifically reached out to him saying, like, I need your climate change stuff. So there are actually more there are 3 in the Sesame Street series. But this was the one that Tim liked the best because he likes to do the Count voice on tours. But since it's 8 o'clock, I figured we might as well switch to questions if there are any.
Just put on the pig.
Oh, just put on the pig. All right. So we're gonna jump ahead one to the pig. This is the ending.
Because that's all, folks, and everybody loves Porky Pig. And this is the best-selling postcard in our store and stuff like that.
But yeah, if anyone has any questions about the show, about Tim's research, about the museum, we are here for them.
Right. This was fascinating. I love all the storytelling behind all the posters and just the background and how you pull a show like this together. Just a couple of comments in not so much questions, but comments. I have a couple questions. Julie's put a note in here that in the 70s there was a campaign including posters featuring Woodsy the Owl with the tagline "Give a hoot, don't pollute," and that made a really strong impression on kids as well. And that was a powerful campaign too. So it's like it must have been really difficult for you, Tim, to make decisions on which to pick because there's so much content out there.
There's a lot of content. We actually, I think, bought, you know, the 33 posters from 17 countries. We bought 65 or so posters. I think another 5 or so have come into the collection since then, specifically for this. So we're going to keep on collecting. But yeah, you know, you can only add so many posters into the show and add the various levels, the layers that you want to do.
And also with shows at the museum, our goal is not to necessarily present an exhaustive show, but to present a show where the narrative is clear and concise. Like, it's better to show 5 posters that have a clear meaning that can actually tell a story than every poster ever made that creates this convoluted narrative. So being able to craft a narrative that people can have all different access and entry points to is very important to how we structure an exhibition.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So I'm just curious, as far as artists, who are you excited by right now that you're watching the posters that they're building on environmental issues?
I mean, Winston Sang is my number one for contemporary poster design, and his stuff is, well, so posters are a bit of a dying art. Like with the advent of digital, you don't see them on the street as much. But Winston's stuff and it'll be different where if you're in a different city. And posters are a language of cities. You do not see them necessarily in like my mom's from down the shore. Like she doesn't see any posters in Spring Lake, New Jersey. But because there just aren't, there just isn't the means of, you can't put on somebody's house without pissing them off. So yeah, so who is hot in your in your area will differ depending on where you are in the world. So Winston is my number one for protest and political and activist posters at the moment, but that's because I'm in New York. Someone in LA will have a completely different answer.
And I think Winston is interesting because, you know, he has a commercial practice. This is what he does as his sideline on issues he believes in.
Yeah, he's a big designer for Adidas and Supreme. So I mean, he's a serious commercial designer.
Fascinating. So we have Elizabeth who wants to talk. So I'm just going to go ahead. Elizabeth, just unmute yourself and ask your question. Elizabeth, can you do that? Otherwise, you can just drop your question into Q&A. I can't hear you. Okay. Well, she's figuring that out, and we'll wait for her. Georgia and I have been putting some. I got an issue. We can't unmute as participants, so I apologize, Elizabeth. Drop your question into Q&A. Georgia and I have been putting links to visit Poster House and all the other resources, your books, etc., into the chat. So please check that out. Georgia, did you have any other specific questions?
There was one question that actually I put in the chat. You talked about the Swiss poster, which had the hand and the skeleton.
Yeah.
And when I was listening to it, did I hear you correctly that was an older poster?
Yes, it's from 1961. So we cheated.
Yeah.
So it says 1970 to 2020. I lied. We liked it. And we just wanted it in. But, you know, it's also the whole point, I guess, with stuff is that because the Swiss were addressing issues in 1961, you know, nobody ever worries about drinking Swiss water. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't concerned about the date, Tim. I was curious how this would have been made, you know, being that it's over 50 years old. How is this a drawing or is this?
So this is photo offset lithography.
Okay.
And Hans Erni, again, his career was over 80 years of poster production. He's a beloved Swiss artist, and any poster issued by the Swiss government by law has to be issued in the 4 official languages of Switzerland.
Yeah.
So German, French, Italian, and Romansh. And then they added in English for this. So you'll see a lot of posters that follow these visual cues. And he did 2 posters later on in his career, I think 10 or 12 years later, Tim, maybe 20 years later.
The air quality ones.
Yeah, to Save Our Air, Save Our Woods, so Save Our Forests, that are equally morbid. But clearly the campaign had impact that 20 years later, they're still asking him like, hey, can you make an addition to that series?
And, you know, that generally speaking, the artists in the show give their time for free. And his last poster was for the UN Year of the Forest. So he was a keen environmentalist right until the end when he produced that poster at age 103.
Wow. That's impressive. In general, we're getting a lot of comments and feedback how awesome this is, and they're just really enjoying this talk. Quick question here. Do you have any posters featuring messages from musicians? I came in from Cheryl. She's asking. I'm not sure for this show, but maybe you have other shows that the Poster House is sponsoring.
So do they mean like about music or posters designed by musicians?
We're going to do a gig poster show, right?
Eventually, it's not on the calendar yet, but we have like psychedelic rock posters. We've certainly we have a big collection of now. But if you're talking about posters featuring like posters featuring like Joni Mitchell lyrics, like what are we, I need parameters.
Oh, I'm sorry, environmental messages from musicians.
No.
I mean,
That would be a no.
it is
Not yet.
interesting that musicians, like poster designers, have over the years got associated with environmentalism, and we put together a playlist because of that. But there are no actual, like Marvin Gaye says, he just did the songs. But there's no actual posters that we could find.
Yeah, I
Got it.
think that would also be kind of a rights issue thing. Like a poster can't be like, it would be very difficult for an organization to issue a poster with lyrics by Bob Dylan on there without getting sued by Bob Dylan. So you have to also keep in mind that these are commercial objects, so like there are rights issues around a lot of stuff. But definitely check out Tim's playlist that's on our website. It's 50 years of environmental music, and it's all banging.
Yeah, we listed that as one of the resources, and I know for the solar eclipse, a lot of people put together song lists for that as well, like Total
Yeah.
Eclipse of the Heart, like so many fun songs. So that was really fun. It's great. I'm just so excited. We're thrilled that you guys were able to join us and share all of this. And I know I'm going to go back to the poster house and check out some more exhibits.
It's a great place to hang out.
Yeah. All right. Georgia, do you have anything else?
No,
We
just
are a
that-
little over 8.
Yeah, thank you so much, Angelina and Tim, for being with us this
Thank you.
evening. This was, as many of us said, I think the backstories has just been fascinating. You have a group of environmentalists, and to have that information is, we nerd out on that kind of stuff. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll
Yeah,
see you
and we'll
folks.
leave. Yeah, the webinar is officially over, but we will leave the Zoom open for a few minutes in case you want to scroll through to pick up those links and those resources, so you can open them up in browsers on your computer. So, Tim and Angelina, you exit when you wish, but we will leave the Zoom open for a few minutes so people can scroll through that.
Right. Have a nice night, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank
have a
you.
nice, have
Thank
a
you
nice
so
night.
much.
Happy Earth Day.
Here.